The doors of the great hall slammed open before Lena Ashvale had a chance to breathe. 2 guards in dark ceremonial coats flanked her on either side, their hands not touching her but close enough that the message was clear. She was not here by honor. She was here because the law said she had to be. The hall was enormous. Hundreds of candles burned in iron chandeliers above long rows of seated alpha leaders, their mates, their advisors, and their heirs. The room smelled of pine resin and polished wood and something older, something that Lena could not name but that her body recognized as danger. Her boots clicked against the stone floor as the guards led her forward, and she kept her eyes ahead, focused on the far wall where a carved wolf crest hung between 2 red banners. She had told herself she would not look at the crowd. She looked anyway. Every face that turned toward her wore the same expression. Not cruelty, exactly. Something worse than cruelty. Indifference mixed with a faint, practiced amusement, the way people look at something that has already been decided. The mating auction was the oldest tradition among the wolf packs. Once every 3 years, unmated she-wolves of the eligible age were brought before the assembled alphas of every pack, and the alphas could bid for a bond. It was supposed to be about alliance, about strengthening bloodlines, about honoring the old ways. What it actually was, Lena had known since she was old enough to understand, was a room full of powerful men deciding the value of a woman in less time than it took to finish a cup of tea. She had no illusions about why she was here. Pack law required attendance. Every unmated she-wolf between the ages of 19 and 24 had to present. There was no exemption for low birth, no exemption for an absent father, no exemption for a wolf gift that had never once shown itself in 22 years of living. So here she stood. The auctioneer was a thin man with a gray beard and a voice trained to carry across large rooms. He stood at the front of the presentation floor and called names from a leather-bound register. Each name was followed by a brief recitation of lineage, gift classification, and pack of origin. Each woman walked forward when her name was called, stood for a moment while the room assessed her, and then the bids came in or they did not. Most of the women before Lena received bids within seconds. Some received several, the alphas raising their hands in measured competition until the auctioneer acknowledged the highest. A few received none, and those women were escorted to a side chamber with a brisk efficiency that was somehow more humiliating than if someone had simply told them to go home. When the auctioneer called her name, Lena walked forward. She had worn the blue dress that the pack matron had handed her that morning. It was a plain dress, clean and pressed, but plain. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face. On her right forearm, visible below the short sleeve, was the scar she had carried since childhood, a pale, irregular mark that ran from her wrist to the inside of her elbow. She had long since stopped trying to cover it. The auctioneer read from his register without looking up. Lena Ashvale. Age 22. Pack of origin, the Ashvale Lowlands, formerly under the governance of Pack Elder Dren. Wolf gift classification, unawakened. Lineage, Omega descent. Father, status unknown, records sealed. He set the register down and looked at the room. Silence. Not the brief silence that preceded most bids. A longer silence. A silence with weight. Lena stood still. She had expected this. She had rehearsed, in the quiet of her small room the night before, how she would feel when it happened. She had told herself she would feel nothing. She had been wrong about that. Feeling nothing was a skill, and it turned out she had not practiced it enough. One of the alphas in the second row leaned toward his advisor and said something under his breath. His advisor glanced at Lena and then away, and the alpha sat back and crossed his arms. Another man near the end of the row shook his head slightly, just once, before returning his attention to the papers in his hand. The auctioneer cleared his throat. The floor is open for Lena Ashvale. More silence. Someone coughed. Somewhere in the upper gallery, a chair scraped against stone. Lena fixed her gaze on the carved wolf crest at the far wall and counted the seconds. She had gotten to 11 when a voice came from the back of the hall. 100,000 marks. Every head in the room turned. The voice had come from the far end of the hall, from the elevated section where the highest-ranking visitors were seated. A man stood there. He was tall, with dark hair and a stillness about him that made the space around him feel quieter than the rest of the room. He wore no ceremonial coat, no rank sash, none of the formal decorations that the other alphas used to signal their position. He did not need them. Everyone in the room already knew exactly who he was. Cale Donmore. The Alpha King. Sovereign over every pack in the Northern and Southern Territories. The most powerful wolf-born man alive. He had his hand raised, just barely, 2 fingers lifted from the armrest of his chair. His eyes were on Lena. Only on Lena. And his expression was exactly as it always was in the portraits and the formal accounts she had read, utterly unreadable. The auctioneer opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. 100,000 marks, he repeated, and his voice came out smaller than he had clearly intended. From Alpha King Cale Donmore. Does the floor respond? No one raised a hand. No one breathed loudly enough to be heard. 100,000 marks was not a bid. It was a declaration. No alpha in the room was going to raise his hand against the king. The floor does not respond, the auctioneer said. He looked at Lena. He looked at his register. He looked at Cale. Then by the law of the mating auction, the bond right for Lena Ashvale is granted to Alpha King Cale Donmore. Lena did not move. She was waiting for the part where it turned out to be a mistake. A clerical error. Someone would correct something, and the auctioneer would apologize, and the guards would escort her to the side chamber with the other women who had received no bids, and the world would return to the shape she had always known it to be. No one corrected anything. One of the king's attendants appeared at her side, a young man in a gray coat, who offered her a small bow and said, quietly and without expression, "Please come with me." Lena turned her head and looked, for the first time, directly at Cale Donmore. He was already standing. He had not waited for the ceremony to close. He was already moving toward the side doors, and as he walked, he passed close enough to the presentation floor that for just a moment, he was no more than 15 feet from where she stood. He did not look back at her. But he slowed his step, just slightly, as he passed. And in that fraction of a second, something crossed his face that Lena could not name. It was not pity. It was not the practiced blankness of before. It was something that looked, in the one moment she had to read it, very much like relief. Then he was through the doors, and she was left standing on the presentation floor in her plain blue dress, with an attendant waiting patiently at her elbow, and 200 pairs of eyes on her back, and not a single answer for any of it. She took a breath. She followed the attendant. The hall doors closed behind her, and the noise of the crowd rose immediately, filling the space she had left. She did not hear what they said. She did not try to. She walked forward, step by steady step, her jaw set and her hands still, and she thought only one thing as she left the building and stepped into the cold night air. Whatever this was, she was going to face it with her head up. That was the only thing she knew how to do. The palace was 3 hours north by road, built into the base of a mountain range so old the stone had turned black with age. Lena arrived after midnight, in a carriage that was warmer and better sprung than anything she had ever ridden in. She had not slept. She had sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched the dark countryside move past the window and tried to think clearly about what had happened and found that she could not. A woman named Petra met her at the palace entrance. Petra was somewhere in her 50s, gray-haired and efficient, with the bearing of someone who had managed large things for a long time and found the work neither exciting nor particularly burdensome. She introduced herself as the head of household staff and led Lena through a series of corridors, up 2 staircases, and into a wing of the palace that was clearly reserved for someone who was expected to stay. The rooms were large. There was a sitting room with a fire already burning, A bedroom with heavy curtains and a bed that could have slept 4 people, a smaller room with shelves for clothes, and a bathroom with a copper tub and running water, which Lena had encountered only twice before in her life. Is all of this for me? Lena asked. It is, Petra said. She was already moving around the room, adjusting things, checking that the fire was drawing correctly. And the king. When will I speak with him? Petra paused, very briefly. The king has meetings from early morning through midday. He has asked that you be given time to settle. Someone will inform you when he is available. Lena waited for more. No more came. All right, she said. Petra left, and Lena stood alone in the center of a room that cost more to furnish than the entire block of the lowlands where she had grown up. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the ceiling. She got up and went to the window and looked out at the mountains in the dark. She was still standing there when the sky began to lighten, and she had not slept, and she still had not one single answer. Cale did not come in the morning. His attendant, the same young man from the auction hall, whose name turned out to be Owen, brought her breakfast on a tray and told her that the king sent his regards and hoped she had rested. Lena thanked Owen politely and did not mention that she had not rested at all. She spent the morning exploring the wing she had been given, which was not very large but which connected at one end to a covered walkway that overlooked an interior garden. She walked the length of it twice and then sat on a stone bench and watched a bird she could not identify hop along the edge of a low wall. At midday, Owen reappeared and told her that the king would receive her in the east study at the 3rd bell. She was there at the 2nd bell. She was not going to let him see her waiting outside the door, so she came in at exactly the 3rd bell when Owen opened it for her. Cale was standing at the far side of the room, looking at a map that had been spread across a wide table. He did not look up immediately. He finished reading whatever he had been reading on the map, and then he straightened and turned and looked at her. In the full light of day, he was even more composed than he had seemed in the auction hall. He was not an old man, perhaps 32 or 33, but there was a quality to his stillness that felt much older. He gestured toward a pair of chairs near the fireplace. Please sit, he said. She sat. He sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. You have questions, he said. Yes, she said. Starting with why? He looked at her steadily. That is a question I am not ready to answer today. She felt a spike of frustration, clean and sharp. You bid 100,000 marks for a woman you have never met, and you are not ready to explain why. That is correct. She stared at him. That is not a satisfactory answer. I know, he said. I am asking you to be patient. And if I am not interested in being patient? Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement. Something quieter. Then I would ask you to consider that patience, in this case, may matter more than either of us knows yet. That answer told her nothing and somehow unsettled her more than a flat refusal would have. She looked at him for a long moment, reading what she could read, and found exactly what she had found in the auction hall. Nothing she could name with certainty. You looked at my arm, she said. At the auction. Twice. He did not deny it. I did. Why? He was quiet. Then he said, because I recognized it. You have never met me. No, he said. I have not. She waited for him to continue. He did not continue. He folded his hands on his knee and looked at her with the same controlled, unreadable patience, and she understood that she had arrived at the end of what he was prepared to say today. She stood. I will be patient, she said. For now. But I want you to know that I am not someone who stays quiet when I am being kept in the dark. I am not built that way. He looked up at her, and this time she was almost certain there was something in his eyes that was closer to respect than anything else. I know, he said. That is one of the reasons I chose you. She left the room with more questions than she had arrived with, and the first faint, uncomfortable sense that whatever she had walked into was much larger than a mating auction bid. 3 days passed. Then 4. Kale was present at the palace, always somewhere nearby, but their meetings were brief and careful. He joined her twice for meals, in the smaller dining room rather than the great hall, and during those meals they talked about ordinary things. The mountain weather. The age of the palace stonework. A book she had found in the wing library. He was, she discovered, someone who listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, he was direct. He did not waste words. She found it easier than she expected to sit across from him. She also found it increasingly difficult to stay behind the wall she had built between herself and the question of what he actually wanted from her. On the 5th day, she met Dara. Dara was the palace healer, a woman of about 40 with short brown hair and ink-stained fingers and the habit of walking very quickly and then stopping dead, as if she had just remembered something. She appeared in the corridor outside Lena's wing while Lena was returning from the garden walkway and introduced herself with the brisk efficiency of someone who was going to be friendly whether there was time for it or not. "You're the one from the auction," Dara said. "Yes," Lena said. "Good. I was hoping to meet you." Dara fell into step beside her. "I've been in the East Archive for the last week. I found something I think you should see." Lena stopped walking. "What kind of something?" "The kind that explains a few things that probably feel very unexplained right now." Dara lowered her voice, not because there was anyone nearby, but from habit. "Not here. Come to the healing room tonight, after the evening bells." She was already walking away before Lena could answer. That evening, in a small stone room that smelled of dried herbs and vinegar, Dara spread 3 pages of old archive parchment on a work table under a lamp. The pages were water-damaged at the edges, the writing faded in some places to near invisibility, but enough remained to read. "This is part of a prophecy record," Dara said. "The original document is in the restricted archive. These are copies I made before the door was relocked. The original was filed under a category called Sealed by Royal Order, which means the current king did not seal it. His father did, about 30 years ago." Lena leaned over the pages. The language was old and formal, but readable. She read slowly, moving through passages about bloodlines and elemental agreements and the old compact between the wolf packs and the spirit forces of the land that predated the current system by centuries. And then she reached a section near the bottom of the 2nd page, where the ink was clearest, and she read one sentence that stopped her cold. "The marked she-wolf of Ashvale blood shall wake what the king cannot finish alone." She straightened. She read it again. "Ashvale," she said. "Your family name," Dara said. Lena looked at her. "This was sealed 30 years ago." "Yes. I was not born 30 years ago." "No," Dara said. "You weren't. Which means whoever sealed it knew something about your family line before you existed. And whoever sealed it did not want anyone finding it." Lena set the page down carefully on the table. Her hands were completely steady. She was proud of that. "Does the king know you found this?" she asked. Dara shook her head. "I have not told him. I found it on my own. I am telling you first." "Why?" "Because," Dara said, with a directness that Lena was beginning to recognize as simply how the woman spoke, "it's about you. You should know it before anyone else decides what to do with the information." That night, Lena went back to her room and sat at the small writing desk by the window for a long time. She read the copies Dara had given her 3 times. She thought about the way Kale had looked at her arm. About the word he had used. Recognized. She thought about the phrase in the old text. Marked she-wolf. She looked at the scar on her forearm. She had been told her whole life it was an old wound from a childhood fall. She had no memory of the fall. She had asked about it once, when she was 12, and the pack matron at the time had said only that it had been a bad accident and that she should be careful on rocky ground. She pressed her fingers lightly against the mark. It had never hurt. Not once. Not even when she was very young. Most scars were sensitive to pressure. This one never had been. She took her hand away. She did not sleep again that night. In the morning, she went to the east study. She did not wait for the third bell. She walked in while Cale was still standing at his map table, and she closed the door behind her, and she said, without preamble, "Tell me what you know about a prophecy involving the Ashvale bloodline." The stillness that came over his face in that moment was a different kind of stillness than she had seen before. Not the composed, deliberate quiet of a man who was managing what he revealed. Something older and heavier, like a door settling shut. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Sit down, Lena." And this time, the way he said her name told her that the waiting was over. He sat across from her. He did not look away from her. And he began to speak. "The founding line," he said, "is what most packs know only as legend. The original bloodline that existed before the current pack structure, before territorial law, before the mating auction, before any of the institutions you and I have lived our entire lives inside. The wolves of the founding line were different from ordinary wolves. Their gifts were not the standard forms: speed, strength, heightened instinct. Their gifts were tied to something much older. The elemental compact. The agreement between the first wolves and the spirit forces of the land." He paused. Lena did not speak. She let him continue. "Roughly 300 years ago, the founding line was systematically removed from power. It was done quietly, over generations, through discrediting, through exile, through forced interbreeding with lower gift lines until the original gift was diluted to nothing. By my grandfather's time, the general belief among pack leadership was that the founding line no longer existed. That it had died out." He looked at her arm. "It had not died out," he said. "It had hidden. Your father's family had been protecting a direct founding descendant for 4 generations. Each generation chose one child to carry the unbroken blood. They suppressed the gift deliberately, hiding it from pack census records, reporting false gift classifications, moving when they had to. Your father was the last of that protection line. You are what he was protecting." The room was very quiet. "The mark on your arm," Cale said, "is not a scar. It is a seal. Your father placed it there when you were an infant. It suppresses the founding gift so that it reads as absent to any wolf who senses you. Without the seal, your gift would have announced itself at birth, and there are people who have been watching for exactly that signal for 30 years, who would have found you immediately." Lena's voice, when she found it, was steady. She was grateful for that. "Where is my father?" she said. Cale's expression changed. "Just slightly. But enough. My father, the previous Alpha King, had your father removed 12 years ago. Not killed. Hidden. Placed in protection custody in a location that I was not told for many years. I found the record 3 years ago, when I inherited the full royal archive. Your father is alive." The word alive landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending rings outward through everything. "He is alive," she repeated. "Yes. And your father hid him. To protect him. And to protect you. The faction that has been hunting the founding bloodline for 3 centuries is still active. My father believed that separating you from your father reduced the risk of discovery. He may have been right. He may also have been wrong in ways I am only now beginning to understand." Lena stood. She moved to the window and stood with her back to him and looked out at the courtyard below where 2 palace guards were changing their rotation with the practiced ease of people who had done the same thing 1,000 times. Ordinary life, moving on its ordinary track. She had come to the palace 5 days ago as a woman with no bloodline worth mentioning, no gift, no story. She was leaving this conversation as something entirely different. She was not sure she had the right name for what she was yet. She turned back to face him. The bonding ceremony, she said. The council has already scheduled it. Yes. You chose me at the auction because of the prophecy. Because of what I carry. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. That was how it began. The words hung between them, precise and uncomfortable. And now, she said. He held her gaze. Now I am asking you to trust me long enough to let me show you the rest of my answer. Not because you owe me trust. You do not. But because I believe what is coming requires both of us, and we will face it better if we are not doing it at arm's length. She looked at him for a long time. I need to speak with my father, she said. That is not a request. I know, he said. I am already working on it. She nodded once. Then she walked to the door and opened it and paused with her hand on the frame. I am not going to be a tool, Cale. Whatever I carry, whatever the prophecy says. I am not something to be pointed at a problem and set loose. I need you to understand that before the ceremony. He was quiet. Then, quietly, I do understand it. Better than you may think. She left. And in the space she had occupied, in the still air of the East study, the Alpha King sat alone for a long time with his hands folded and his eyes on the door, and the expression on his face, had anyone been there to see it, was not that of a man who had gotten what he planned. It was the expression of a man who had gotten something he had not quite expected, and who was not entirely sure yet what to do with it. That evening, Owen brought a sealed note to Lena's room. No sender name. She opened it and read the single line inside. Do not bond with him until you know what you carry. There are those who will kill you for it. She folded the note and held it in her hand. Outside, the mountain wind was picking up. Somewhere far below, a door banged in the courtyard, and then was still. She was beginning to understand that she had not simply walked into a palace. She had walked into the center of something that had been building for 300 years, and every piece of it, every sealed record, every hidden father, every bid in a crowded hall, had been pointing, all along, to the single moment when she would have to decide who she was. She was not afraid. She was ready. The bonding ceremony was set for the following evening. The council had arranged everything with swift, formal efficiency, the kind of efficiency that reminded Lena of how little anyone had asked her opinion. The palace seamstress had delivered a ceremonial dress to her room that morning, and the head of household had sent a schedule of the day's events, and Owen had appeared twice to ask if she needed anything, and through all of it, Lena had moved with the appearance of calm while something hard and alert lived behind her sternum, watching every new detail and cataloging it. She had not spoken to Cale since their conversation in the East study. She had not avoided him. Their paths simply had not crossed. She had begun to wonder if that was deliberate, if he was giving her space, or if the machinery of the palace day simply kept them on different tracks. She was in the garden walkway just after midday when Lady Seraphine found her. Lena had heard the name. She had heard it 3 separate times in her first week at the palace, always from people who mentioned it with the particular careful neutrality that meant they were choosing their words around a topic they considered volatile. Seraphine was the daughter of a high northern alpha, bond candidate to the king before Lena's arrival, a woman of considerable social standing and, by every account, considerable personal conviction about where she was supposed to be. She was not what Lena had pictured. She was taller than Lena, with red blonde hair and pale eyes, and she carried herself with an ease that came from never having had a reason to doubt her place in any room she entered. She was, objectively, exactly the kind of woman you would expect an alpha king to stand beside. She looked at Lena with an expression of deliberate pleasantness that did not reach past the surface. I wanted to introduce myself, Seraphine said. Before the ceremony. All right, Lena said. I hope you understand, Seraphine continued, still with that pleasant surface in place, that what happened at the auction was unusual. Cale acts on strategy. He always has. Whatever brought you here, it was not an ordinary choice. I know, Lena said. Seraphine's pleasantness flickered, only for a moment. She had expected, Lena thought, either defensiveness or uncertainty. She had gotten neither. You know, Seraphine repeated. Yes. He told me. He told you. That it was not an ordinary choice, Lena said. Yes. A pause. Then Seraphine said, I hope it works out the way you are expecting. The way she said it was careful and light and contained, underneath the lightness, a weight that Lena recognized. It was the weight of someone who had already made a decision she had not yet announced. Thank you, Lena said. Seraphine left. Lena watched her go and then turned back to the garden below and thought, with the careful attention she had been applying to every person in this palace since she arrived, that Seraphine was someone she should not underestimate. That night, the night before the ceremony, she could not sleep. She lay in the dark of her room and listened to the wind against the mountain and went over everything she had learned, everything she had been told, everything that did not yet connect. The prophecy. The seal on her arm. Her father, alive somewhere, a man she could not remember but whose hands had placed a mark on her skin when she was an infant to keep her safe. Cale's voice when he said it was not how it had stayed. At the 3rd hour past midnight, there was a sound at her door. Not a knock. A sliding sound, paper against stone. She crossed the room and opened the door. The corridor was empty. On the floor at her feet was a folded piece of paper. She picked it up and unfolded it. They are sending someone tonight. Not for you. For the healer. Get to Dara before the 4th bell. No signature. The handwriting was different from the note she had received before. Lena dressed in 3 minutes and moved. She reached the healing room at a run and found the door already open. Dara was inside, awake, standing in the center of the room with a lamp in her hand and her expression very controlled. You got a note, Lena said. Yes, Dara said. So did I. They looked at each other for a moment. Someone in this palace is watching out for us, Lena said. Or watching us for reasons of their own, Dara said. But I think tonight we take the help wherever it comes from. They spent the rest of the night in the healing room, and no one came. But in the morning, when Owen went to deliver Lena's breakfast, he found that someone had gone through the outer room of her wing in the night. Nothing was taken. But papers had been moved, the small desk drawer had been opened, and the copy of the prophecy pages that Lena had kept folded inside her book was gone. She stood in the doorway of her room and looked at the disturbed desk and understood that the walls of safety she had told herself existed in this palace were thinner than she had believed. She also understood that whatever she had been waiting to feel ready for, the waiting was over. The ceremony was 3 hours away. She went to find Cale. She found him in the Great Hall, in conference with 3 council members, and she walked in without waiting for Owen to announce her and said, in the quiet, direct voice she used when she was not going to be moved, I need to speak with you alone. The council members looked at her. Cale looked at her. Then he said to his council, calmly, give us the room. They went. She told him about the notes. About the search of her room. About the missing prophecy copies. She told him with her arms at her sides and her chin level and her voice very steady, and he listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the person sending the notes. I think I know who it is. I cannot confirm it yet. Someone is inside the palace working against us, she said. Yes. And the ceremony tonight puts me in a very visible position. Yes, he said. I know. Then we need to decide, she said, right now, whether we go ahead with it or whether we change the plan. He looked at her across the width of the Great Hall. What do you want to do? He asked. And the way he asked it was entirely direct, no suggestion of what answer he expected, no pull toward either outcome. A genuine question. She thought about her father's hands placing a seal on her arm in the dark of her first days of life. She thought about 300 years of a bloodline hiding. She thought about a woman in a corridor with pleasant eyes and a decision already made. "We go ahead," she said. "But not because the council scheduled it. Because I am choosing to." Something in his expression shifted. "Settled." "All right," he said. And that was when the doors of the great hall opened with a force that sent both of them turning, and the first of the guards stumbled in with a wound on his arm, and the sound of running feet came from the east corridor, and the palace erupted into chaos. Lena stood absolutely still for one heartbeat in the center of it. Then her arm began to burn, deep at the side of the seal, and the light that came off her skin was silver and ancient and entirely unexpected, and it was the most alive she had ever felt in her life. The faction had come for her. And they had made the mistake of coming before she knew what she was. That mistake was about to cost them everything. Lena did not run. She stood in the great hall as the guards scrambled, as shouting filled the corridors, as the sound of the doors being forced came from the eastern wing, and she breathed, slowly and deliberately, and let the burning in her arm move through her instead of fighting it. Cale was at her side immediately. He had not drawn a weapon. He was watching the room, watching the entrances, reading the pattern of the noise with the focus of someone who had managed threats his whole life. He said nothing to her. He did not grab her arm or try to move her. He simply stood beside her, and that steadiness was the most useful thing he could have offered. "How many?" she said. "At least 6 from the east. Possibly more from the lower passage." "And the bonding room?" "Sealed." "The council?" "Already alerted. They are moving to the secondary chamber." Lena looked toward the east corridor as the first of the intruders came through. They were not wearing the uniform of any pack she recognized. They wore gray, plain and unmarked, and they moved with the coordination of people who had done this before. Professional. Prepared. They stopped when they saw her. One of them, the one at the front, held up a hand and the others halted behind him. He looked at Lena with a steadiness that matched Cale's, and he said, "We are not here for a fight. We are here for the she-wolf. Give her to us and the rest of this ends quietly." Cale said, very calmly, "No." The man looked at him. "This does not need to involve the king." "The king," Cale said, with a precision that made the title sound like something carved from stone, "is already involved." The man shook his head. He made a gesture with his right hand. And that was when Lena felt the binding seal hit Cale like a wall. She saw it happen, not with her eyes, but with something older that she had not known she possessed. She felt the ancient, suppressive force of the binding crash into him like a wave, saw his breath cut short, saw his legs buckle. He caught himself on the hall table and stayed upright, but barely. The gray-clothed men moved forward. Lena stepped in front of Cale. She was not thinking about the prophecy. She was not thinking about bloodlines or compacts or 3 centuries of hunted ancestors. She was thinking about one thing, a man who had asked her what she wanted to do and waited, genuinely, for her answer, and she was not going to let anything happen to him. The burning in her arm reached her shoulder. "Stop," she said. Her own voice surprised her. It was not loud. It did not need to be loud. It had a resonance that she had never heard in herself before, something that seemed to come from below the ordinary register of speech. The men stopped. Not because they chose to. Because the sound of her voice had done something to the air in the room. Lena looked at the scar on her forearm. The mark was glowing. There was no other word for it. A silver, steady light, pulsing at the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She had never been afraid of the mark. Not once in her life. She had always felt, beneath the confusion of not understanding it, that it was hers. That it belonged to her the way breathing belonged to her. Now, for the first time, she understood why. It was not a wound. It was not even a seal, not anymore. It was a door, and she had just decided to open it. The light expanded outward from her arm. Not violently, not with heat or force or pain. It simply spread, the way light moves when a curtain is pulled back. It filled the hall and the corridor beyond, and she heard, from somewhere far off, shouts of surprise and then silence. The binding seal on Cale broke. She felt it break the way you feel a rope release, a sudden slack in a tension you had been holding without realizing. Cale straightened. His breathing steadied. He looked at her. The men in gray were backed against the far wall. Not hurt. Not bound. Simply stopped by something they had not accounted for. The one at the front looked at Lena with an expression she recognized as the specific look of a person whose plan has just collapsed. "The girl," he said. He was not speaking to his men. He was speaking more to himself. "She actually has it." "Yes," Lena said. "I do." More guards arrived from the north corridor, palace guards in their proper uniforms, and the men in gray offered no further resistance. They were not armed, she noticed. They had come with the binding seal and the expectation that Cale would be incapacitated and she would be taken before her gift had any reason to reveal itself. They had not planned for this. Owen appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. He took in the room, the glowing light now fading from the hall, the men against the wall, the king upright and steady, and Lena standing in the center of all of it with her arm at her side. He blinked once. "The council is asking," he said carefully, "if the ceremony should be postponed." Cale looked at Lena. Lena looked at the room. "No," she said. The ceremony happened as the sun was setting, in the private chamber off the Great Hall, with Dara and Owen and 2 palace elders as witnesses. There were no rows of assembled alphas. There was no auctioneer. There was only Lena and Cale standing a foot apart in the orange light of a dozen candles while an elder spoke the old words of the bonding compact. When the elder reached the moment of choice, he stopped speaking and looked at Lena. She looked at Cale. He was watching her with an expression she had learned to read in the past days, not because she had been given a key, but because she had paid attention. It was the expression he had only in the moments when he was not managing anything. Not composed or deliberate or contained. Something much simpler. Something that did not need a name. "I choose this," she said. "I choose you. Not because of a prophecy. Not because of what I carry. Because you asked me what I wanted, and you waited for the answer." He was quiet for a moment. His jaw was tight in a way that had nothing to do with composure. "I choose you," he said. "Because you walked into a hall full of people who had already decided your value, and you carried your head exactly as high as it belonged." The elder resumed the words. When the bond mark appeared, it appeared on both of them simultaneously, which the elder stated quietly had not been recorded in any ceremony he could cite from memory. Dual marks. 2 origins, completing a single pattern. Lena looked at the mark on her wrist for a long moment after the elder had finished. Then she looked up. Cale was still watching her. She met his eyes. "I need to find my father," she said. "I know," he said. "We leave at first light." The road north was 4 days long in winter, and winter had arrived before them. Lena sat across from Cale in the carriage most of the way, and they talked more than she had expected. Not about what was coming. About the smaller things that build into the shape of a person, the books she had read as a child in the lowlands, the pack elders who had looked at her and found her lacking, the first time she had ever felt the suppressed pulse of something under her skin and not known what it was. He listened to all of it with the quality of attention she had come to rely on. And he offered pieces of himself in return. His own father, remote and calculating. The years of learning to lead a structure built on rules he had inherited rather than made. The loneliness of a position that everyone wants to be near and no one wants to actually see. She listened to him the same way he listened to her. On the 4th day, as the carriage came down a long mountain road into a valley ringed by old pines, Cale told her they were close. The house was small. Stone walls, a low roof, a garden that had been tended carefully and consistently despite the remoteness of the location. Smoke from the chimney. A lantern by the door already burning. Lena stepped out of the carriage and stood in the cold air and looked at the house. A man opened the door. He was older than she had imagined, or perhaps the years had been harder than she had been prepared for. He had her dark hair, now heavily streaked with gray, and he was thinner than she pictured when she tried to imagine him, and he stood in the doorway of his small house with an expression that she understood, because she felt it on her own face in that moment. Disbelief, moving into something that had no clean name. He came down the 3 steps from his door and crossed the yard, and she walked toward him, and they met somewhere in the middle of the frozen grass. He put his arms around her. She let herself be held, for the first time in more years than she could count, by someone who had known her from the beginning. He was shaking. She realized, after a moment, that she was too. "Lena," he said. It was the only thing he said for a long time. Just her name. As if the word itself was the whole explanation. She did not let go. She did not know how long they stood there. Long enough for the cold to settle in through her coat. Long enough for the light to shift. When she finally stepped back, her father, whose name was Edmund, held her face in both of his hands and looked at her the way people look at something they were afraid they would never see again. "The seal is gone," he said. He had seen the light, she knew, when she walked toward him. Even faded, it was still visible to someone who knew what to look for. "Yes," she said. It opened. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were bright. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry for every year I could not tell you. I am sorry for the auction and the lowlands and everything you did not have because I was trying to keep you safe." She shook her head. "You kept me alive long enough to find out who I was. That is not something to apologize for." He looked past her at Cale, who had stayed by the carriage. Then he looked back at her. "He found you," Edmund said. "He did," she said. "And?" She thought about how to answer that. She looked at the bond mark on her wrist. "He is someone who waits for the answer," she said. "That is rarer than any gift." Edmund nodded slowly. Then he said, "Come inside. I want to tell you everything. From the beginning." They went inside. The house was warm and small and there were books on every shelf and a fire burning in the hearth, and her father made tea in the manner of someone who had learned that the quiet, ordinary actions of a day are what hold a person together over long years. He talked for 3 hours. He told her about the founding line and his own parents and the decision made when she was born, the 7 families who had hidden and preserved the bloodline across generations, the network of watchers who had passed information to one another in codes for 2 centuries. He told her about the day he received word that a faction inside the Royal Council had identified him as a founding guardian, and the arrangement made with the previous Alpha King, and what it had cost him to go. He told her that every year on her birthday, he had written her a letter. He had a box of them, 22 letters, sealed and unsent. He gave her the box before she left. She held it in her lap on the return journey and did not open it. Not yet. Some things needed their own time. When they arrived back at the palace, Dara was waiting. Not with urgency, not with crisis, but with the ink-stained hands and quick step that meant she had found something she needed to share. "The council meeting," she said. "It is tomorrow. They want to talk about what happened. About what you are. About what comes next." Lena nodded. "Good. I have things to say." The council chamber was large and old, and the members who sat around its table were men who had spent their careers deciding things about people who were not in the room. Lena walked in and sat at the table, not at its edge, not in the position that had been designated for a guest or a witness. She sat at its center, across from the senior council member, and she put her hands flat on the table and waited for the room to settle. The senior council member, a man named Aldrich, looked at her for a moment. "The events of 3 nights ago," he began. were an attack on the palace by a faction that has been operating within the council structure for at least 30 years, Lena said. Yes. I know. I was there. Aldrich paused. The suppression treaties, she continued. The ones that sealed the founding bloodline records and placed founding descendants under hidden custody. Those end today. Those treaties were ratified by the previous king for reasons of security, she said. I know the reason. The security method failed, because the faction it was designed to prevent still got inside the palace walls. The treaties did not protect the founding bloodline. They made it easier to hide us from each other and from ourselves. They end today. A silence in the room. Cale, seated to her right, said nothing. He had made clear, before they entered, that the position he would hold in this meeting was hers to define. She had told him she intended to define it clearly. Lady Seraphine, she said, changing direction without announcement. Her contact with the faction is documented. I am not calling for harsh action. I am calling for a formal process, transparent and recorded, and for the outcome of that process to be made known to the assembled pack leaders. No sealed files. No private arrangements. Transparency. Aldrich looked at Cale. Cale looked at the table in front of him. Then he looked at Aldrich. You heard her. Aldrich sat back. The meeting lasted 2 more hours. Lena spoke more than any other person in the room. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to raise her voice. She had the bone-deep patience of someone who had spent her entire life being dismissed and had learned to outlast the dismissal every single time. When she left the chamber, Dara was waiting in the corridor with 2 cups of tea. Well? Dara said. Good, Lena said. It went well. She took the cup and stood in the corridor and drank her tea and felt the bond mark warm on her wrist and thought about the box of 22 letters waiting in her room, and the mountains outside the palace windows, and the healer Dara who had slipped her copies of a forbidden document because she believed a woman deserved to know her own story. She thought about the word the previous Alpha King had added beside her name in the genealogy chart. She thought about the word Cale had written there instead. She thought about the girl in a blue dress on an auction floor, counting to 11 in the silence. She set down the empty cup. What are you going to do now? Dara asked. Lena thought about it for a moment. Find the others, she said. The healer told me there may be more hidden bloodlines. Families who have been living in the dark because someone decided they should. I am going to find them and bring the records into the light where anyone can read them. She began walking toward her rooms, where the box of letters was waiting. And after that? Dara said, keeping pace. Lena smiled. It was a real one, not the composed, careful version she had been wearing in public rooms for the past several weeks. After that, she said, I am going to open my father's letters. All 22 of them. She had been the girl no one would bid for. She had walked into a hall full of people who had already made their decision about her, and she had held her head at exactly the height it belonged, because that was the only thing she had ever known how to do. She was the girl who turned out to be the most important person in the room. She was not surprised by that. Not really. She had always known, somewhere beneath the seal and the silence and the long years of other people's certainty, that she was nothing, that she was something. She had simply been waiting for the room to catch up.